On the afternoon of September 14th, 1978, an event transpired within a McDonald's restaurant in Alexandria, Virginia, that would unveil a significant Soviet intelligence operation concealed near the nation's capital. This establishment was situated just off U.S. Route 1, a bustling commuter route connecting Washington, D.C. to the expansive suburbs of Northern Virginia. It regularly served government employees, military personnel, and contractors who passed through daily. The restaurant was located between a gas station and a strip mall. However, what was occurring there in plain sight was far from ordinary. This incident was uncovered not by advanced surveillance or federal agents, but by an employee who observed something peculiar. The employee was a woman named Patricia Martinez, then 23 years old, who had been employed at the McDonald's for just over a year. Her duties involved taking orders, operating the cash register, and periodically cleaning the dining area, which included wiping tables, sweeping floors, and emptying trash cans. It was during one of these cleaning rounds, around 2:30 in the afternoon, that something caught her attention. A man in his mid-40s, dressed in a dark suit and wearing glasses, had been seated in a booth toward the back of the dining area for approximately 20 minutes. He appeared to be alone, eating slowly and occasionally checking his watch. The kind of customer who seemed in no rush to depart. Then, a second man entered. He was younger, perhaps in his late 30s, with dark hair and a more substantial build. He ordered food at the counter, took his meal to a booth on the opposite side of the dining area, and began to eat. The two men never acknowledged each other. They avoided eye contact, made no gestures, and did not speak. To any casual observer, they were simply two strangers coincidentally having lunch in the same restaurant at the same time. However, what occurred next suggested otherwise. The younger man finished his meal, gathered the remnants of his food into the brown paper McDonald's bag it came in, and stood up. He walked towards the exit. As he passed the trash bin near the door, he carefully placed the bag on top of the receptacle, not inside it, but on the flat surface above, and departed without looking back. A few seconds later, the older man stood up from his booth, walked directly to the trash bin, retrieved the bag, and exited the restaurant. Patricia had been in the process of cleaning a table when this interaction took place, and she paused, rag in hand, trying to comprehend what she had just witnessed. It was unusual, certainly, but was it more than that? Perhaps the younger man had forgotten something in the bag, and the older man was a friend retrieving it for him. Perhaps they had arrived together, and she had simply not noticed. She resumed her work, and by the end of her shift, the incident had faded into the background noise of the day. But 3 weeks later, it happened again. On October 5th, 1978, the same two men appeared at the McDonald's, and the sequence unfolded in precisely the same manner. The older man arrived first, sometime around 2 in the afternoon, and took a seat in one of the booths along the far wall. He ordered food, ate slowly, and waited. About 20 minutes later, the younger man entered, ordered at the counter, sat in a separate booth, and finished his meal. When he left, he placed his brown paper bag on top of the trash bin near the exit. Seconds later, the older man stood up, retrieved the bag, and walked out. This time, Patricia was certain it was not a coincidence. The timing was too precise, the movements too deliberate. The two men were executing a routine, and whatever they were doing, they were going to great lengths to avoid being seen together. She mentioned it to her brother that evening, a man named Michael Martinez, who worked as a security guard at a federal office building in Arlington, believing that if anyone would take the observation seriously, it would be someone with a background in security. However, Michael's reaction was dismissive, even mocking. A suggestion was made, half in jest, that perhaps Patricia had stumbled upon spies operating out of a McDonald's, which seemed absurd enough that the conversation shifted, and the matter was left unresolved. Still, Patricia could not shake the feeling that what she had witnessed was intentional, that it signified something beyond the innocent explanations her brother had offered. She decided that if it occurred again, she would observe more closely and, if necessary, determine what to do next. The decision to take the observation seriously, to treat it as something worth investigating rather than dismissing it as a coincidence or paranoia, would prove to be the thread that unraveled an intelligence operation that had been successfully running in Northern Virginia since at least the spring of 1976, and possibly longer. On October 26th, the opportunity to observe more carefully presented itself. The older man arrived first, as before, settling into a booth near the back of the dining area. This time, Patricia had enlisted the assistance of a co-worker, a woman named Lisa Harmon, who had been working at the McDonald's for about 6 months. Patricia trusted her enough to involve her in a situation that still seemed like it might turn out to be nothing. The two women positioned themselves where they could observe both the older man and the entrance, and they waited. 20 minutes later, the younger man entered. He ordered food and took it to a booth on the opposite side of the restaurant and began eating. Patricia and Lisa watched without drawing attention to themselves, continuing with their usual tasks while keeping both men in their peripheral vision. When the younger man finished his meal, he wiped his hands on a napkin and began gathering the remnants of his food into the brown paper bag. But then, just before folding the top of the bag closed, he reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out something small, too small and too quick for Patricia or Lisa to identify clearly from their vantage point, and placed it inside the bag. He folded the bag, stood up, walked to the trash bin near the exit, and placed it on top. Then he left. A few seconds later, the older man stood up, walked to the trash bin, retrieved the bag, and exited the restaurant. Patricia and Lisa exchanged glances, and the unspoken question between them was clear. What was in that bag? The fact that the younger man had added something to it before leaving, something he had brought with him and kept in his jacket pocket, elevated the situation from merely odd to genuinely suspicious. Over the subsequent 2 weeks, the two women discussed what they had seen and devised a plan. The next time the exchange occurred, Patricia would position herself near the trash bin, pretending to clean or restock supplies. The moment the younger man placed the bag on top and walked out, she would grab it and dispose of it before the older man could retrieve it. Then, in the back of the restaurant, away from customers and any potential witnesses, they would open the bag and discover its contents. It was risky, and there was a chance the older man might confront her or create a scene. However, Patricia reasoned that if he did, she could simply feign ignorance and insist that she was merely performing her job, that she had not realized the bag was anything other than trash left behind by a careless patron. On November 9th, 1978, the plan was put into action. The older man arrived first, as always, and took his seat in a booth near the windows, where he could observe the entrance. 20 minutes later, the younger man entered, and Patricia immediately positioned herself near the trash bin with a rag and a spray bottle of cleaner, ostentatiously wiping down the area and straightening the napkin dispensers on a nearby counter. When the younger man finished his meal and walked towards the exit, bag in hand, Patricia moved slowly and deliberately, buying time and ensuring her movements appeared natural. The younger man placed the bag on top of the trash bin and exited. Patricia waited exactly 3 seconds, long enough for the man to clear the doorway and step into the parking lot. Then she grabbed the bag, shoved it down into the trash receptacle, pulled the full garbage bag out of the bin, tied it off, and began walking towards the back of the restaurant. A voice came from behind her, calm but insistent. Patricia turned and saw the older man standing there, his expression neutral, but his eyes focused intently on the garbage bag she was carrying. He informed her that he believed she had just discarded his food, that he had left it on top of the bin and had been returning to retrieve it. Patricia maintained a light, apologetic tone, explaining that she had not realized the bag belonged to anyone, that it was already in the trash now and mixed with everything else, and that she could offer him a refund or allow him to reorder if he wished. The older man's jaw tightened slightly, and he inquired if she could simply open the bag so he could check. Patricia repeated that once something was placed in the trash, health code regulations prevented her from retrieving it, as it was already contaminated by contact with other refuse. She reiterated, however, that she would be happy to provide a refund or arrange for a replacement meal. There was a pause, a moment where the older man appeared to be weighing his options, calculating whether pushing the issue further would attract more attention than it was worth. Then, he shook his head and informed her it was not necessary. He turned and walked out of the restaurant, his pace slightly quicker than it had been when he initially stood up. Patricia watched him leave before continuing towards the back of the building. In the storage area, away from the dining room and the counter, Patricia and Lisa locked the door behind them and opened the garbage bag. They retrieved napkins, disposable cups, soiled wrappers, and ultimately, the paper sack. Patricia opened it gingerly, her hands trembling slightly, and reached within. What emerged were two small photographs, each only a few inches in width, printed on what appeared to be standard photo paper. The images displayed what seemed to be pages of typed documents, arrays of data, technical schematics, stamps, and markings visible at the edges suggesting official classification. The format was instantly recognizable to anyone familiar with government documents or military records. These were not personal snapshots. These were visual representations of classified information. The kind of intelligence that should not be outside a secure facility, let alone concealed within a fast food bag and exchanged between two individuals in a public eatery. The resolution was immediate. This required reporting to the FBI, and it needed to be done with utmost urgency. Patricia and Lisa returned the photographs to the bag, enclosing it within a larger plastic bag to preserve any potential evidence. Patricia then contacted the FBI field office in Alexandria later that afternoon, after her shift concluded and she had departed from the restaurant. The agent who received the call initially appeared dubious. Accounts of espionage discovered by fast food workers were not typically the sort of leads that initiated significant investigations. However, when Patricia described the photographs and offered to bring them to the field office, the nature of the conversation changed. An appointment was scheduled for the subsequent morning, and Patricia and Lisa were instructed to refrain from discussing their discovery with anyone else, including their colleagues at the restaurant. On November 10th, Patricia and Lisa arrived at the FBI field office and met with two agents. They provided their accounts, examined the photographs, and posed detailed inquiries about the two men, the timing of the exchanges, and any other details Patricia or Lisa could recall. The photographs were officially logged as evidence and forwarded to FBI laboratory analysts and counterintelligence specialists at their headquarters in Washington. Confirmation was received the following week. The documents depicted in the photographs were authentic and appeared to originate from within the Department of Defense, specifically concerning materials related to satellite reconnaissance systems and technical specifications classified at levels demanding substantial security clearance for access. What Patricia had chanced upon was not minor theft or a simple misunderstanding. It was espionage, and it was ongoing. By November 15, 1978, a task force had been formed to manage the case, headed by Special Agent Richard Kellerman. He was a seasoned counterintelligence officer with over 15 years of experience tracking Soviet intelligence operations on American soil. Kellerman had handled cases in New York, Los Angeles, and Washington, and he had encountered numerous dead drops, brush passes, and signal sites, allowing him to recognize the hallmarks of professional operational tradecraft when he reviewed the details of the events at McDonald's. The assessment was straightforward. What Patricia had observed was a classic dead drop, a method for transferring information between an intelligence operative and their handler without direct physical contact or any communication that could be intercepted or witnessed. The elegance of the technique from an operational perspective lay in its simplicity and its deniability. When executed correctly, it left no traceable link between the two parties involved. And if one of them faced apprehension or suspicion, the other could simply disengage and disappear, never having been directly connected to the compromised individual. However, this dead drop had been compromised. The bag had been intercepted, and now an opportunity existed to dismantle the operation and identify both the operative stealing the information and the handler receiving it. The strategy developed by Kellerman and his team involved establishing surveillance at the McDonald's during the hours when the exchanges had previously occurred, which, based on Patricia's observations, appeared to be Thursday afternoons between approximately 2 and 3 o'clock. It was anticipated that another meeting would occur within the next 2 to 3 weeks, provided the network had not been alerted by the older man's unsuccessful attempt to retrieve the bag on November 9th. FBI agents would be positioned inside the restaurant, posing as patrons, and additional agents would be stationed in vehicles outside, prepared to initiate mobile surveillance on both individuals the moment they departed the premises. The objective was to observe the exchange, follow both individuals to ascertain their destinations after leaving McDonald's, and gather sufficient evidence to support arrests and charges that would be legally sound in federal court. The surveillance operation commenced on November 16, 1978, with agents rotating shifts to prevent any single face from becoming too familiar to regular customers or staff. For the initial week, nothing transpired. The McDonald's experienced its usual influx of customers: commuters stopping for lunch, families with children, teenagers congregating after school. Yet, neither of the two men described by Patricia made an appearance. The second week concluded similarly. By the commencement of the third week, frustration began to surface among the task force. Some suspected the operation had been compromised, that the older man's encounter with Patricia had generated sufficient suspicion within the Soviet network to cause the shutdown of the site. Kellerman, however, maintained the belief that there was still a possibility the network would attempt to re-establish contact, that the failure of a single exchange would not be enough to abandon a method that had proven effective for so long. On December 7, 1978, Kellerman's intuition was partially validated. The younger man entered the McDonald's shortly after 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and the occurrence was instantly communicated to the FBI surveillance team via radio. But something was different this time, something that became apparent within the first few minutes of observation. The younger man seemed anxious. He scanned the dining area with greater frequency than Patricia had described in her prior accounts, his movements rapid and tense, his eyes surveying the booths and tables as if searching for someone absent. He ordered his food at the counter, his voice audible to the undercover agent standing 2 positions behind him in the queue, and he took a seat in a booth towards the rear of the establishment. He began to eat, but his attention was evidently divided. His gaze repeatedly returned to the entrance, observing each person who walked through the door. The older man never arrived. Minutes elapsed, then 10, then 15. There was no sign of him. The younger man finished his meal, leaving his refuse on the table rather than disposing of it in the bin near the exit, and departed the restaurant. FBI agents positioned in unmarked vehicles outside immediately initiated mobile surveillance, following the younger man as he proceeded to a parking lot 3 blocks away, entered a late-model sedan, and drove towards the outskirts of Alexandria. The pursuit continued for another 20 minutes, with agents maintaining a careful distance to avoid detection, before the younger man ultimately pulled into the parking lot of a small apartment complex in a residential area off Seminary Road. Agents recorded the address, the vehicle's license plate number, and the apartment building number where the man entered. Subsequently, they ceased surveillance, unwilling to risk revealing their presence by following him inside or lingering too long in an area where an unfamiliar vehicle would attract attention. Over the ensuing 2 weeks, surveillance persisted both at the McDonald's and at the apartment complex where the younger man had gone. Background checks were conducted on the vehicle registration, revealing it to be registered to a David Allen Becker, a 38-year-old technical analyst employed by a defense contractor named Systems Analysis Corporation, which held classified contracts with the Department of Defense. Further investigation indicated that Becker possessed security clearance granting him access to sensitive materials pertaining to satellite reconnaissance systems, communication protocols, and technical specifications for hardware utilized in intelligence-gathering operations. He had occupied this position for nearly 4 years, since early 1975. His personnel file contained no adverse indications, no reported financial difficulties, no disciplinary issues, and no failed polygraph examinations. On paper, David Becker appeared to be precisely the sort of dependable mid-level contractor upon whom defense agencies relied for the smooth operation of classified programs. However, the accumulating evidence began to suggest a different reality. The younger man appeared at the McDonald's one more time on December 21st. Once again, he arrived alone, surveyed his surroundings nervously for several minutes, and then departed without establishing contact with anyone. The older man, the individual whom Patricia had observed collecting the bag on 3 separate occasions, never reappeared. It became increasingly evident that something had fundamentally disrupted the operation, prompting Kellerman to decide on proceeding with an arrest before the trail grew entirely cold, or before the suspect realized he was under investigation and attempted to escape or destroy evidence. On the morning of December 23, 1978, FBI agents executed a federal arrest warrant and a search warrant at David Becker's apartment at dawn. Becker was apprehended as he exited his apartment to go to work, and agents immediately commenced a systematic search of the premises. What they discovered corroborated the investigation's suspicions. Inside a closet in the bedroom, concealed beneath a pile of blankets, they found a 35mm camera and several rolls of undeveloped film. Within a desk drawer, investigators discovered handwritten notes detailing technical specifications and data. These materials corresponded to items that Becca would have had access to through his employment at Systems Analysis Corporation. In the kitchen, affixed to the interior of a cabinet positioned above the refrigerator, an envelope was found. This envelope contained close to $8,000 in cash, organized into bundles of $100 bills. Becca was taken to the FBI field office located in Alexandria and seated in an interrogation room. For the initial 3 hours, he remained silent, exercising his right to do so and requesting legal representation. However, as the morning progressed into the afternoon and the collected evidence was systematically presented to him, Becca's resistance began to falter. After conferring with a court-appointed lawyer and being apprised of the potential prison sentences he faced under espionage laws, Becca consented to cooperate with the investigators in return for favorable consideration during sentencing. The information Becca provided to the FBI over the subsequent days served both to corroborate the investigation's findings and to generate significant frustration for Kellerman and his team. Becca confessed that he had been photographing classified materials for approximately 2.5 years, commencing in the spring of 1976. He utilized the camera discovered in his apartment to duplicate documents he accessed via his professional duties. He explained that he had been recruited by an individual known to him only as Victor, who had approached him at a bar in the DuPont Circle area of Washington, D.C. Sometime around late March or early April of 1976, the approach was gradual, professional, and meticulously planned. Victor initiated a conversation, purchased Becca a drink, and over several weeks, cultivated what appeared to be a genuine friendship. They met for drinks on numerous occasions, always at different public venues, where their discussions would be obscured by ambient noise, making surveillance difficult to establish. Eventually, Victor presented his proposition. He informed Becca that he represented an organization seeking to acquire specific types of technical information. This information, classified by the United States government, Victor argued, should not be so designated, as it represented scientific knowledge that belonged to the global community, not to any single nation. Victor initially framed the request in ideological terms, appealing to Becca's sense of fairness and his discontent with governmental bureaucracy. However, when this tactic did not yield immediate results, Victor shifted to a more pragmatic argument. He inquired about Becca's financial circumstances, and Becca, who was at that time grappling with debt and medical expenses stemming from his wife's recent surgery, acknowledged that funds were scarce. Victor offered a solution: provide copies of certain documents. He assured Becca that these would not endanger lives or compromise military operations. Only technical specifications and data that would help equalize the international standing between nations. In exchange, Victor would compensate him with sums that began at $500 per exchange and eventually increased to several $1,000s. Becca maintained that his primary motivation was financial. He claimed to have been desperate and that Victor had capitalized on that desperation. Nevertheless, the FBI's assessment was that Becca was fully aware of his actions and had made a deliberate choice to betray his country for monetary gain. The dead drop at the McDonald's was Victor's design, implemented sometime in late summer or early fall of 1976, after the initial exchanges had been conducted through other means that Becca could not fully recall or claimed not to remember in detail. The system was straightforward and, as Victor had assured him, virtually foolproof. Becca would photograph the documents whenever possible, develop the film using chemicals and equipment provided by Victor, and then place the photographs inside his McDonald's bag during his lunch break. The entire transaction took less than a minute and required no verbal communication, no eye contact, and no direct interaction that could be observed or recorded by onlookers. This system operated without incident for just over 2 years, encompassing dozens of exchanges, until the afternoon of November 9, 1978, when Patricia Martinez intercepted the bag before Victor could retrieve it. Becca explained that that day he waited in the parking lot as he always did after completing a drop to observe if Victor successfully collected the bag. When Victor emerged from the McDonald's empty-handed, Becca understood that something had gone awry. He followed the communication protocol Victor had established for emergencies, placing a specific mark on a utility pole and awaited Victor's response. However, Victor never replied. When pressed for details regarding Victor, the information Becca provided proved frustratingly vague and, in some instances, intentionally misleading. He described a man in his mid-40s, approximately 6 feet tall, with brown hair showing gray at the temples, and a slight accent that Becca believed was Eastern European, possibly Russian, Polish, or Czech. Beyond this physical description, Becca claimed to know almost no useful information. No last name, no address, no phone number, and no details about Victor's residence, place of work, or the cover identity he maintained in his daily life. All communications between Becca and Victor were managed through a signaling system that necessitated no direct contact. When Becca had materials to convey, he would affix a piece of red tape to a specific mailbox situated along Route 1, approximately 2 miles south of the McDonald's, on any given Tuesday. Victor, in turn, would respond by leaving a chalk mark on a utility pole near the restaurant on a Wednesday, confirming that the exchange would take place the following afternoon. The FBI cross-referenced Becca's physical description of Victor with their database of known and suspected Soviet intelligence operatives active in the United States. This process generated a list of approximately 40 potential matches, but none could be definitively linked to the man Becca had described with sufficient certainty to warrant arrests or further investigation. Kellerman's assessment was that Victor was likely operating under deep cover, utilizing an alias and a meticulously crafted legend designed to withstand casual scrutiny and to leave no traceable record. Identifying Victor, Kellerman concluded, could realistically only be achieved by setting a trap, using Becca as bait, in the hope that Victor's operational discipline would falter. On January 9, 1979, with Becca's complete cooperation and under FBI supervision, a piece of red tape was placed on the designated mailbox along Route 1, signaling to Victor that Becca had materials ready for transfer. The FBI had prepared a set of fabricated documents, convincing forgeries that resembled legitimate classified materials pertaining to satellite reconnaissance, but contained information that was either outdated or deliberately misleading, rendering it useless for intelligence purposes. The plan was for Becca to adhere strictly to the established routine, executing it precisely as he had done numerous times before. Arrive at the McDonald's on the designated Thursday afternoon, order food, consume his meal, place the bag atop the trash bin near the exit, and depart. FBI agents were strategically positioned throughout the restaurant and in vehicles outside, prepared to act the moment Victor retrieved the bag. Kellerman and his team arrived at the location early on Thursday morning and began establishing their positions. 2 agents posed as customers within the dining area. One positioned near the front windows, affording a clear view of the entrance, and the other near the rear booths where Victor typically seated himself. 3 additional agents were stationed in unmarked vehicles in the parking lot. A surveillance van, equipped with radio apparatus, was positioned across the street, offering a vantage point of both the restaurant entrance and the ingress points to Route 1. Patricia Martinez and Lisa Harmon, both on duty that day, had been briefed by FBI agents to behave as naturally as possible and to avoid any actions that might alert Victor or any counter-surveillance operatives to the presence of law enforcement. David Becca arrived at the McDonald's just after 2 o'clock in the afternoon, precisely as scheduled. He ordered his food and took a seat in a booth located in the middle section of the dining area. FBI agents observed as he finished his meal, gathered his refuse into the brown paper bag, stood up, and proceeded to the trash bin situated near the exit. He placed the bag on top of the bin, exactly as he had done in prior exchanges, and then exited the restaurant. The bag remained there, visible and undisturbed, for 1 minute, then 2, then 5. Kellerman, monitoring the operation from the surveillance van across the street, felt his pulse quicken as the minutes elapsed without any sign of Victor. 10 minutes passed, then 15. The bag stayed on top of the trash bin, and no one approached it. Customers entered and exited, some casting glances at the bag as they discarded their own trash, but no one retrieved it. After 20 minutes, Kellerman began to accept what was becoming increasingly apparent. Victor was not going to appear. The decision was made for one of the undercover agents inside the restaurant to retrieve the bag, and the operation was officially terminated. Surveillance at the McDonald's continued for the subsequent 3 weeks, with agents maintaining a presence during the hours when previous exchanges had occurred, but Victor never materialized. Agents also monitored the mailbox and the utility pole for any indication that Victor had attempted to re-establish contact with Becca through the signaling system, yet there was nothing. No chalk marks, no indication that Victor remained in the area or was still active. The Federal Bureau of Investigation's inquiry into Victor persisted for several additional years, involving regular examinations of the case file and efforts to align Becca's depiction with newly identified Soviet intelligence officers. However, no substantial breakthroughs ever emerged. Becca was questioned on numerous occasions throughout the years, including during debriefings led by Central Intelligence Agency counterintelligence specialists. These specialists were hopeful that he might recall further specifics regarding Victor's appearance, speech patterns, or conduct that could be correlated with other active investigations. Yet, Becca consistently asserted that he had divulged all his knowledge to investigators, and that Victor had been exceptionally careful to disclose minimal information about his actual identity or background. David Allen Becker faced numerous charges of espionage under Title 18 of the United States Code. In March of 1979, following weeks of discussions between his legal counsel and federal prosecutors, he admitted guilt to the unauthorized release of classified information to a foreign power. On April 12, 1979, Becker appeared before a federal judge in the Eastern District of Virginia for his sentencing. During the proceeding, Becker's attorney advocated for leniency, contending that Becca had been deceived and compelled by a skilled foreign intelligence operative, that he had fully assisted investigators subsequent to his apprehension, and that he had conveyed sincere regret for his transgressions. Federal prosecutors countered that Becca had been principally driven by avarice, asserting that he had received many thousands of dollars over more than 2 years for betraying his nation, and that his assistance had ultimately failed to yield any practical intelligence concerning Victor or the wider Soviet network operating within the Washington area. The judge, after considering the evidence and the arguments presented by both parties, imposed a sentence of 18 years in federal prison upon David Becker. The judge remarked that Becca's actions had jeopardized American national security, and that the reduced sentence he might have received for his cooperation was diminished by the fact that his cooperation did not result in any further apprehensions. Becca would ultimately serve 11.5 years before being granted parole in November of 1990. The McDonald's establishment in Alexandria continued to operate for approximately 20 years after 1978. However, the operation itself, the dead drop that had functioned without issue, had concluded. And its end was not attributed to advanced counterintelligence efforts or groundbreaking surveillance technology, but rather to an observant employee who noticed a man habitually leaving his refuse atop the trash receptacle and deemed it worthy of further inspection.